Well, good morning, everyone. I think we're about 9:30, and I think we'll go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to cover Genesis 31 through 35. I'm trying to take sort of 5-chapter increments so that we get done with this by, I think, Labor Day. I think that's the end of this whole cycle. So there's 50 chapters in Genesis, so we got a few to go. So we'll get through chapter 31 through 35, and there's a lot of stuff buried in 31, 35 today. So let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to again come together in your house around your word. As we continue to dig into the story of Genesis, Lord, continue to open it up to us so that not only we better understand it, but we understand the message that you're giving to us in our hearts. Like Jacob and the family, a lot of that stuff happens to us as well. But your promises to us and your faithfulness to us are incredible, and for that we praise your name. Be with us today as we continue to go through this journey and help us to better understand this message that you have for us. It's in your name we pray. Amen. I'm using today, and next Sunday as well, the translation The Message. And I use that every once in a while in preaching. I love The Message. This was written by or translated by a man. He was a clergyman. He's dead now. He died in 2018. But Eugene Peterson. He retired in 1991, and then he started on this journey to translate a new translation of the Bible, and he produced it over a period of time between 1993 and 2002. The whole Bible came out in 2002. And the Message is really a very contemporary look at Scripture. And it is a translation from the original Greek and Hebrew. He used 20 scholars to help him out. But I like this translation, so I decided I'm going to use that today and next Sunday as well.
I just started reading the translation of the message, and
It connects. I mean, it seems to explain it a little bit better.
and it seems like I connect more with the details in Deuteronomy and Numbers.
Oh, yeah.
Able to comprehend them.
Yeah. It tends to put terminology. I find it actually easier to read, and it's faster to read because you don't have to do as much thinking because he sort of explains it to you as you go along. But it's not a paraphrase. It's not like the Living Bible. It is actually a translation from Hebrew and Greek. So that's what we're going to be using today. So this is where we're sort of at. Sarah and Abraham are dead and buried. They're in the cave. We've got Isaac who marries Rebekah. Remember, that is sort of an arranged marriage. And it is the sister, Rebekah is the sister of Laban, which we're going to be connecting with today. They have 2 kids, Esau and Jacob. It's likely, as I mentioned last Sunday, there may actually have been some more kids, but these 2 are the ones that are sort of center stage for Isaac and Rebekah. Jacob is a rather deceitful guy, tricks Esau out of the birthright and the final blessing, which opens up, sort of throws the match in for the explosion because Esau wants to kill him. And so Jacob is forced to flee north. And he goes back to a place that we've known before, Haran, which is up in northern Syria. He is tricked. He is deceived by Laban. So we have this incredible dysfunctional family that this whole thing is, because it's one trick and one deceit right after another. He falls in love with Rachel, apparently love at first sight. And if you remember from last Sunday, we've got Laban he works 7 years to get Rachel, and for some reason doesn't figure out when he's in the tent with this woman that actually it's not Rachel, but it's Leah. And so I've never quite got that one of how, either the lights weren't on, and something wasn't, or her voice, maybe they sounded like the same, I don't know.
Explain it in the sermon.
Okay. It's just sort of an interesting moment in time. So we've got Jacob working another 7 years to sort of this connection with Rachel. And then he will have to sort of stay around another 6 years to sort of pull together his life before he moves back or goes back to the land of Canaan. During that period of time, he acquires 4 wives, 11 children, and today we're headed back to the land of Canaan today. This is the family tree that we've been working through. And so we've got from Terah to Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. And then, of course, Jacob has 12 children in the end. Today, it'll be the birth of Benjamin, who is the last one. Rachel will die in childbirth. And that will be part of the story today. And the blessing that we're working with from Abraham on, the blessing takes place through Judah. That is the son that actually the blessing will come through. So we've got 4 wives and 12 kids. And Benjamin, as I said, he'll be born. He'll be the last son, and he'll be born today. So this is where Abraham sort of parked himself, the area of Hebron, and it is located south of Jerusalem, and sort of more of a hill country. And this is where the family seems to make its home. This is Haran, way up north in northern Syria, and this is where our Genesis story takes us a couple of times. This is where Isaac sends his servant to go up and get an arranged marriage for his son. And this is also where Jacob goes to flee for his life to be with Rebekah's brother, Laban. And then he will come back here. So today we're going to be talking, clearly this is part of this love story between Jacob and Rachel. There's also a connection today in the reading. The Canaanite gods start appearing here in Genesis. And the Canaanite gods, there's Baal, there is Astaroth. There's a variety of gods and goddesses that the Canaanites had. And if you remember, one of the directives that God gave to the children of Israel when they finally settled into the Promised Land was to wipe out the Canaanites. And part of it was because of religion, because they had all of these gods and goddesses. It was a very seductive religion. They worshipped on the high places, the hilltops. And a lot of it was very much religious prostitution. The whole concept of fertility, you went to the Canaanite temple and you had sex with prostitutes, religious prostitutes that would lead to fertility, it would lead to good crops, it would, a whole bunch of stuff. And God said, wipe that out. The children of Israel started to do that until they discovered, not too bad. So that led to a lot of issues in the children of Israel, because they did not wipe out the Canaanites. So this is an example of an idol. There's been a lot of these that have been discovered in archaeology. Most of the Canaanite idols gods and goddesses that have been discovered have been goddesses. They have been women, and they're generally fairly naked. But these are the household gods that Rachel will steal today when Laban comes and looking for Jacob. So just keep that in mind, that image. So Jacob is wanting to head back home, and we will finally get him back to Canaan today. Just a little bit on this map, we're zeroing in just south of Jerusalem. We've got the Dead Sea on the right. Bethel is one of the places that we're going to stop at today. This is a stop-off point for Abraham when he came down to the land of Canaan, when God directed him down to the land of Canaan. He stops in Bethel. It's a hill, a fairly tall hill. When Jacob flees north to Laban, he will stop here at Bethel. And this is where God sort of gives him a promise, reaffirms the promise that he gave to Abraham. And when he returns, the family will stop here as well. This actually became an important religious area for the children of Israel. Bethel, the name Bethel is house of God, and this is actually one of the early sort of worship places for Jews, for the children of Israel. We know that Abraham and his entourage sort of settled in Hebron. It seems as though Isaac moved south toward Beersheba into this area. Remember last Sunday we had the famine, and so God said, don't go to Egypt, but we have Isaac going over to the Philistines, to Philistia, and that's where he will be located at. Remember, he was digging wells, and he was getting water all over the place, and very successful. And then today when Rachel dies, they will bury her in Bethlehem. And that's located between Bethel and it's just a few miles south of Jerusalem. But Bethlehem will be that area where Rachel is buried. I mean, there's still a tomb there that's Rachel's tomb. I mean, it's important to all three of the religions. It's interesting. Okay, so Esau, when we run into Esau today, because Jacob will get to Esau, and they will have a coming together. Esau is parked south of the Dead Sea. This is where his family now is located at, and this is where the Edomites will emerge. When the children of Israel settle the promised land, what's in blue here is what they will take. So this is the settlement. There's the northern kingdom of Israel, there's the southern kingdom of Judah. So that area there that I have in black, that outline, that is where the children of Israel will settle into the promised land. The one in the lower, that's Gaza Strip today, but that's the Philistines. Okay, so Jacob heads home. Let's dig into chapter 31. Remember, Jacob came to Canaan, or came to Haran to Laban broke. I mean, he didn't have any money. When he leaves, he will be quite wealthy. And part of that is an indication of God's blessings on him. And one of the things that you'll see today as we go through this is, I think Jacob is starting to more so realize God's hand in his life, because you have sort of a different kind of Jacob that starts to emerge as you go through the story. You've got the deceitful Jacob, and of course Rebekah, who doesn't help, who is deceiving Esau, and you get that sort of as this flavor of Jacob. And as he spends his time up north with Laban, and he's working 7 years, 14 years, and then 20 in total, is that his life is changing. And I think his connection with God is strengthening. He's beginning to see God's hand in his life. That comes through very clearly in the reading today in Genesis 31 through 35. These idols that will appear here in the next chapter, one of the things that you might want to think through as we go through this reading, it's sort of a question mark in terms of, has the family, the clan, embraced Almighty God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Because it seems as though there's still some hands in paganism, that they're sort of mixing this stuff together a little bit. And well, as we go through, that just raises some questions about whether or not, how faithful, how much do people know about God? Jacob clearly is connecting with God. How much does the rest of the family embrace him? This seems to be an evolution that's taking place in this family, this clan's life. And Jacob is the one now who is carrying the baton, who has come to a point now of understanding, God has given me this. God has been with me. God has watched over me. The wrestling with the angel, with God today is in this. That's the message for next Sunday, is in this reading today. And it seems as though God is trying to impress upon Jacob, I am with you. I told your grandfather, Abraham, I'm going to be with him. Isaac, and I'm with you now. Can you see it? And if you do, will you rise up and be faithful to me?
How many are in the family?
Well, you got eventually 12 kids, but you've got sort of an entourage. I would think that there's, with other people that are hanging around, and probably I would include in their servants as well. My guess is that you're talking maybe 100, maybe. I don't think it's no small group. It's not just, I think, a couple. It's not just a small little caravan that's moving around. I think there's a lot of ancillary people that are with them. I mean, 100 may be a lot. It's clear it has to be 20, 30 because you've got large flocks and you've got, all the support staff that had to be there. But you'll have 12 kids. You got 4 wives. You got Jacob. So we know that part. Okay, so starting out in chapter 31. Jacob learned that Laban's sons were talking behind his back. Well, we would expect nothing less in this kind of a story, would we? Because everybody's talking behind everybody's back. Jacob has used our father's wealth to make himself rich at our father's expense. Yeah, wouldn't it appear that way? I mean, the way that Jacob is operating. I mean, he's been put in charge of so much, and whatever Jacob seems to touch seems to flourish. At the same time, Jacob noticed that Laban had changed toward him. He wasn't treating him the same. That's when God said to Jacob, go back home. Pack up the bags, go back home. Your time is over here. My guess is that Jacob was ready to do that, and that he has worked hard for his 2 wives, the main wives. He's also inherited the 2 maids that work for these 2 women. Verse 4, so Jacob sent word for Rachel and Leah to meet him out in the field where the flocks were. Sort of a clandestine meeting. I mean, he doesn't want to be spotted, I don't believe, by Laban and the others. So they meet out in the field. He said, I've noticed that your father has changed toward me. He doesn't treat me the same as before. But the God of my father hasn't changed, which is an interesting observation on Jacob's part. He's still with me. You know how hard I've worked for your father. Still, your father has cheated me over and over, changing my wages time and again, but God never let him really hurt me. If he said, your wages will consist of speckled animals, the whole flock would start having speckled lambs and kids. And if he said, from now on, your wages will be streaked animals, the whole flock would have streaked ones. Over and over, God used your father's livestock to reward me. It's an interesting observation, isn't it? I mean, you began to see some growth in Jacob, who's beginning to understand God's hand in his life. I mean, and I suspect that's sort of maybe true in ours as well. I mean, sometimes when you look behind and you see where you've come from, God's hand, quite honestly, seems to be more visible than it is when you peer into the future. Verse 10. Once while the flocks were mating, I had a dream and saw the billy goats, all of them, streaked, speckled, and molted. I mean, these are blemished animals. They would be sort of seconds. Mounting their mates. In the dream, an angel of God called out to me, Jacob. And I said, yes. He said, watch closely. Notice that all the goats in the flock that are mating are streaked, speckled, and molted. I know what Laban's been doing to you. I'm the God of Bethel. So that Bethel spot down in sort of this northern part of what would be Canaan is the reminder, I was with you there. I told you I was going to be with you. Now look back and to see how I blessed you. And remember, Jacob created a pillar or set up a big stone in Bethel as a marker for that encounter with God. He likes to do that. He does it at least 4 times. And we'll we'll have 3 of those in the message, in the lesson today. Now be on your way, get out of this place, go home to your birthplace. What's interesting is what follows. Because Leah and Rachel are now reflecting. So Jacob has said, we're going to go home. This is the reason why. Your father hasn't been very good to me. Verse 14. Rachel and Leah said, well, he's not treated us any better. Aren't we treated worse than outsiders? All he wanted was the money to get from selling us. And he spent all that. Any wealth that God has seen fit to return to us from our father, it's justly ours and our children's. Go ahead. Let's get out of here. Let's pack the bags and let's move. Sort of an interesting clandestine meeting out in the field. Verse 17, Jacob did. He put his children and his wives on camels and gathered all of his livestock and everything he had gotten, everything acquired in Paddan Aram, to go back home to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Verse 19, Laban was off shearing sheep. Rachel stole her father's household gods. That's an important one. I have a feeling that's actually one of the reasons that Laban pursues them. And Jacob had concealed his plans, again, deceit, so well that Laban the Aramean had no idea what was going on, was totally in the dark. Jacob got away with everything he had and was soon across the Euphrates, headed for the hill country of Gilead. He's headed south. 3 days later, Laban finds out, packs up his bags, and heads south to pursue him. Takes him 7 days, but he catches him. And there's an interesting revelation that he gets from God. I put it in red there, right before verse 25. Be careful what you do to Jacob. God's talking to Laban. Good or bad. It's the good part that's sort of odd. Just be careful, because I'm sort of with him. Verse 25, when Laban reached him, Jacob's tents were pitched in the Gilead mountains. Laban pitched his tent there too. What do you mean, said Laban, by keeping me in the dark and sneaking off, hauling my daughters off like prisoners of war? Why did you run off like a thief in the night? Why didn't you tell me? Why, we'd have had a big party. Yeah, sure. There would have been music and all that kind of stuff. But you wouldn't permit me so much as a kiss for my daughters and grandchildren. It was a stupid thing for you to do. If I had a mind to do, I could destroy you right now. But the God of your father spoke to me last night. Be careful what you do to Jacob. So I'm going to keep my hands off of you. I've got the power to destroy you, but keep your hands, I'll keep my hands off of you. You left because you were homesick. The reason that Jacob was leaving partly was because he'd been taken advantage of. Verse 31. Oh, at the end of right there. But why did you steal the household gods? So apparently Laban, before he heads south, must have checked the tents, and the gods were gone. Again, these are those little handheld things. They're almost like a rabbit's, a good luck charm. And if you've got them, if you carry them around with you, your gods are with you. That's all part of what idol worship is about. Verse 31. Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid. I thought you would take your daughters away from me by brute force. But as far as your gods are concerned, if you find that anybody here has them, that person dies. With all of us watching, look around. Go ahead. Check the tents. Go ahead. We'll be your witnesses. Go ahead. See if you can find them, because we didn't take those. Verse 33. Laban went through Jacob's tents, Leah's tent, and the tents of the 2 maids, but didn't find them. He went from Leah's tent to Rachel's. But Rachel had taken the household gods, and what did she do with them? But hid them. She put him in her saddlebag on her camel underneath her. And it's sort of the question that you sort of have with this whole thing is, why did you take the gods? Why did you take the idols? Is it, I mean, there's a couple of thoughts. I mean, one is, do you still believe that these idols have some control? I mean, do you believe that if Laban has the idols, somehow they could track us? Because these gods, these goddesses will be able to help him, give him an edge. And as well, yes, that this strikes at the heart of Laban's faith, his active religious life. Somebody take him. You can see here, I mean, when Laban comes out of her tent, she gives the excuse of why she's not getting off the camel, which is an interesting one. So even though he turned the place upside down, he didn't find the household gods. Verse 36, now it was Jacob's turn to get angry. He lit into Laban. So what's my crime? What wrong have I done to you that you badger me like this? You ransacked the place. Have you turned up a single thing that's yours? Let's see it. Display the evidence. We're watching. And so he unfolds here sort of his emotions in verse 38. In the 20 years I've worked for you, ewes and she-goats never miscarried. I never feasted on the rams from your flock. I never brought you a broken carcass killed by wild animals, but that I paid for it out of my own pocket. Yeah, maybe. Actually, you made me pay whether it was my fault or not. I was out in all kinds of weather, from torrent heat or to freezing cold, putting in many a sleepless night. For 20 years I've done this. I slaved away 14 years for your 2 daughters and another 6 years for your flock, and you changed my wages 10 times. You did it a lot of times. You've been taking advantage of me. I put in my time for the 2 women, but I stuck around even longer. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not stuck with me, you would have sent me off penniless. But God saw the fix I was in and how hard I had worked, and last night rendered his verdict. I mean, essentially saying, pack up your bags and leave. Don't you see this growth in Jacob? It's an interesting one, where Jacob is really connecting, or it seems as though he's connecting with God a little bit better, or a little more closely. Verse 43, Laban defends himself. The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flock is my flock, everything you see is mine. But what can I do about my daughters or for the children they've had? So let's settle things. Let's make an agreement. Let's make it a covenant. Let's make a covenant with each other. And Jacob took, in verse 45, a stone and set it as an upright pillar. He loves doing this. It's a monument. Jacob called his family around, get stones. They gathered stones and heaped them up, and then ate there beside the pile of stones. He even gives it a name. Verse 48, Laban said, this monument of stones will be a witness, beginning now between you and me. It is also called mitzvah, because Laban said, God kept watch between you and me when we were out of each other's sight. If you mistreat my daughters, and this is from Laban, if you mistreat my daughters, or do what? I find that fascinating, isn't it? If you take another wife. Well, Laban, actually, you're the one that sort of created the polygamy situation. I mean, because you switched your daughters on me. Then he's going to come and get them. Verse 51, Laban continued to Jacob, this monument of stones of this stone pillar that I have set up is witness, a witness that I won't cross this line to hurt you, and you won't cross this line to hurt me. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their ancestor, will keep things straight between us. Jacob promised, swearing by the fear of God and of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain. In red there it says, Laban got up early the next morning, kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, and he goes back home. So we're done with Laban now. So now Jacob is headed south. And we know what he's going to have to face, his brother, because Esau's still alive. And remember, he left home because Esau was going to kill him. So does 20 years make a difference? Chapter 32. Jacob went his way with angels of God his way, angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "Oh, God's camp." We don't have any indication what this experience was like. I mean, we know with the children of Israel, there was this pillar of cloud, there was this pillar of fire. There's some presence of God. How do you know these are angels of God? In verse 3, Jacob sent messengers on ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir in Edom. He instructed them, "Tell my master Esau this, a message from your servant Jacob. I've been staying with Laban and couldn't get away until now. I've acquired cattle and donkeys and sheep, also men and women servants. I'm telling you all this, my master, hoping for your approval. Can we get together? Is there still animosity?" This is sort of sending out the white flag and saying, "I want to meet again." Are we going to have a good meeting? So he sends the servants to ask that question. The messengers came back to Jacob and said, "We talked to your brother, Esau. He's on his way. And oh, by the way, don't you love that? 400 men are with him." They must have counted them out. There's a big group coming. It sounds like an army, doesn't it?
Why did he call him my master?
I think it's an indication of honor and respect, because in reality, Esau is the oldest. And I think Jacob probably is being haunted by the fact, I really did deceive you in taking away the birthright. I think this is simply just a term of respect. So verse 7, wouldn't you expect it? Jacob is scared. He's scared, he panics, and what does he do? His plot is to divide the family into two groups. So when Esau comes with his 400 guys, if indeed he attacks us, he can only attack one group at a time. The other group can get away. It's an interesting directive. Verse 9, and then Jacob prayed, "God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, God who told me, go back to your parents." Oh, by the way, God, you told me to come back here. So, in some respects, he's blaming God. "I'll treat you well. I don't deserve all the love and loyalty you've shown me. When I left here and crossed the Jordan, I only had the clothes on my back, and now look at me. 2 camps." So there had to be a significant amount of people here. There had to be support staff, support servants. 2 camps now. That's how large it's grown. "Save me, please, from the violence of my brother, my angry brother. I'm afraid he'll come and attack us all, me, the mothers, and the children. You yourself said, I will treat you well. I've made your descendants like the sands of the sea, far too many to count. Lord, keep that promise." Sort of going to hold it to you. You told me to come back. Now here he comes. Protect me. Verse 13, he slept that night there. Then he prepared a present for his brother Esau from his possessions. And it's actually quite large here. Look at the numbers. 200 goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes. That's a significant amount of animals, livestock, to sort of give to Esau. "Go ahead of me and keep a healthy space between each herd." So he divides all the herds up, and he sort of sends them out in sort of this stepped order. First comes the goats, and next comes this group, and next comes this group. It all is meant to really butter up Esau. I want to be kind to you. I want to put aside any animosity that exists between us. I don't know why Jacob would be mad, Well, we certainly know why Esau would have been mad. And so he gives this sort of trail of gifts to his brother as they're meeting the 400 people. Verse 17, then he instructed the first one out. When my brother Esau comes close and asks, who is your master? Where are you going? Who owns these? Answer him like this, your servant Jacob. They are a gift to you. They're for you. Verse 19, he gave the same instructions to the second servant, third servant, and so on. So they send this string of gifts out. I will soften him up with a succession of gifts. Sometimes that does work, doesn't it? I mean, we wouldn't do it if it didn't. And when you think about it, I mean, this is about 4,000 years ago. I mean, really, in human nature, what really has changed a lot. I mean, we still operate sort of on that same kind of level, right?
Yeah. Well, maybe he's trying to, he stole the birthright, which means that's a double portion.
Yes.
So maybe he's trying to pay him back.
And that could be part of all of this, yes. Yes, that would be a good observation. This could be an attempt. I know I stole the birthright, which would have entitled you to a double portion of the family wealth. And so I'm sort of giving you, that payment back. Yeah, I think that could very well be. Verse 22. But during the night he got up and took his 2 wives and 2 maidservants and his 11 children and crossed the fjord of the Jabbok. That's a river. He got them safely across the brook along with all his possessions. So they've actually crossed this river over into what would be today Jordan to safety. I mean, the water, the river would have been some obstacle. I mean, quite honestly, there's not a lot of water in Israel, even rivers. I mean, you can cross it with not a lot of problem. And here's the lesson for next Sunday's sermon, is right here. Verse 24. But Jacob stayed behind by himself, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he couldn't get the best of Jacob as they wrestled, he deliberately disables Jacob. I mean, he touches his hip. Remember, this cripples Jacob. I don't know if that's permanent or if this is just, if it's temporary. I don't know. The man said, let me go. It's daybreak. And so often in Scripture, I mean, when particularly in the Old Testament, when God encounters people, it always seems to be, or many times it seems to be at night. That strikes me. It's almost daybreak. We need to end this. Jacob said, I'm not letting you go till you do what? Bless me. It sort of connects back to the whole Isaac-Jacob thing, the blessing that Jacob so much wanted, sort of the final blessing. I don't know if does he understand this is in the presence of God? I mean, he will because he's going to find that out. But this wrestling event, I mean, here's this person. And it doesn't seem to indicate this is a dream. This seems to be a physical thing. The man, blessing. Verse 27. The man said, what's your name? He answered, Jacob. The man said, that's not your name anymore. This is where we come to that important moment when Jacob gets the name change to Israel. A warrior of God. God wrestler. The prince of God. From now on, it's Israel. You've wrestled with God, and you've come through. Jacob asked, and what's your name? The man said, why do you want to know my name? And then, right then and there, he blessed him. Jacob named the place Peniel because he said, I saw God face to face and lived to tell the story. I mean, that is one of the things out of the Old Testament in particular, is that you can't look on God in his purity, you'll die. But somehow Jacob understands, I've seen God. I've been in his presence. I've wrestled with him. Sun came up. He left Peniel, limping because of his hip. This is why the Israelites to this day don't eat the hip muscle. It is yet today. So what's the wrestling with God all about? I mean, when you reflect on it, I mean, God is God. I mean, it isn't the fact that Jacob was physically stronger than God, right? I mean, to me, what it represents is that God's trying to teach him a lesson, that he needs to be persistent. He's strong enough. You're strong enough to face Esau. You're strong enough to face the future. You've got that ability. I'm with you. God's with you. Is this the ability to be able to defeat this angel or God? Is that the message? Is that the message he's taking away? I have strength. I can face my brother. And in fact, I can face whatever is coming down the road. I mean, that's sort of the spin I would tend to give to this. It's difficult to understand this. And actually, if this whole encounter, this wrestling with God is mentioned in Hosea 12. I mean, if you read through that at some point, it's just an interesting reflection in the prophet Hosea on Jacob's wrestling with God. But to me, it's God telling him, you've got the power, you've got the strength, I'm with you. Keep moving on. Chapter 33. Jacob looked up, saw Esau coming with the 400 men. He divided the children between Leah and Rachel. Interesting now how he stacks and racks the group. To me, I don't understand, because we have in the previous chapter, he's taken the family over to the other side of the river. But for some reason, now in chapter 33, they're back. So, I mean, this is how it is. He put the maidservants out in front. He puts Leah next, and the children. He puts Rachel next with Joseph, and he led the way as he approached. They seem to be the order of importance, don't they? Get the maidservants out there. Put them in front. So if the army attacks, they'll die first, and we can run. That's how I sort of read it. But Esau ran up and embraced him, held him tight, and kissed him, and they both wept. I mean, God's been working behind the scenes. Then Esau looked around and saw the women and children. And who are these with you? The children that God saw fit to bless me with. Again, this growth of Jacob is that he's really beginning to understand God's presence in his life. And he's giving credit to God. It's not, gee, I worked so hard over the past years, and this is the product of my doing. No, actually, it's God. It's God. Verse 8, Esau then asked, and what was the meaning of all those herds that I met? I was hoping that they would pave the way for my master to welcome me. I mean, this was a gift to you, so we didn't have a fight, or you wouldn't kill me. Esau said, oh, brother, I have plenty of everything. Keep what is yours for yourself. And in verses 10 and 11, what Jacob is essentially, no, you take them. And this actually may go back to Roy's comment in terms of, I sort of really do owe you. I mean, I did swindle you out of the birthright. I got the blessing. And that did entitle me to more, though he hasn't gotten it yet because Isaac isn't dead. But Esau, in the end of verse 11, accepts the gift. He takes it. Then Esau said, let's start out on our way. I'll take the lead. But Jacob said, my master can see that the children are frail, and the flocks and herds are nursing, making for slow going. If I push them too hard, even for a day, I'd lose them all. So, master, you go ahead of your servant while I take it easy at the pace of my flocks and children. I'll catch up with you in Seir. And so Esau, let me at least lend you some of my men. No need of doing that. Is it the reality that Jacob is still a bit afraid of his brother? That this is all a game? That you're pretending? You're pretending that you're my friend. What happens here in verse 17 is interesting because Jacob goes to this other side of sort of the Jordan, over into what is today Jordan, and he builds a shelter. Verse 17, the word for shelter here is more of a house. It's not a tent anymore. It's a structure. And he wants to, I think, stay there instead of continuing heading south. This opens up the whole situation with the rape of his daughter, because that's what unfolds next. Jacob is in the wrong place. God is telling him, you go back to Canaan, because that's the land I'm giving you. This is what happens then in this whole rape situation. Verse 18 and 20, and that's how it happened that Jacob arrived all in one piece in Shechem, in the land of Canaan, all the way from Paddan Aram. He camped near the city. He bought the land where he pitched his tent. So like Abraham, he bought some land in Canaan. From the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, he paid 100 silver coins for it. And then he built an altar there. Praise God, thank you, I've got land. What ends up in the end is that he sort of crosses over into what is today Jordan. So chapter 34. One day Dinah, remember that's his daughter. One day Dinah, and it's the only daughter that I believe he had, or at least it's mentioned, the daughter of Leah, had given Jacob, went to visit some of the women in the country of Shechem. Time has passed here. Because remember, I mean, the children weren't all that old when they arrived in Canaan. And so time has passed. I mean, because she's got to be at least a teenager. Because she's out now on her own. She's much more of an adult. Went to visit some of the women in that country of Shechem. The son of Hamor, the Hivite, who was chieftain there, saw her and raped her. Then he felt a strong attraction to Dinah. I mean, it's the weirdness of humanity. Jacob's daughter fell in love with her and wooed her. Shechem went to his father Hamor and said, I've got to have her as my wife. You go make the deal. And that's basically what this is about now. He rapes her, and then he wants her. Verse 8. Hamor spoke with Jacob and his sons. My son Shechem is head over heels in love with your daughter. Give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters to us. We'll give you our daughters. Let's have a big party. Let's all be one big happy family, because that's basically what he's contending here. You set the bridal price in verses 11 and 12. Set the bridal price as high as you will. I mean, I want to make this deal. In verse 13, 17, Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father with cunning. Their sister, after all, had been raped. They said, this is impossible. We could never give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised. Why? We'd be disgraced. The only condition on which we can take business is if all your men become circumcised like us. Then we'll freely exchange daughters in the marriage and make ourselves at home among you and become one big happy family. But if this is not an acceptable condition, the deal's off. Well, from verse 18 down to verse 25, they go back to the community and they say, we've got a deal for you. If all the men get circumcised, we're going to have a bigger family. And in fact, these other folks here, they're fairly wealthy. I mean, they seem to be blessed. Let's bring them in to the family. So they get circumcised. I mean, it's an interesting, how they would have convinced them to do this, but verse 25. 3 days after the circumcision, while all the men were still very sore, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each with his sword in hand, walked into the city and killed all the guys. They take revenge. I mean, is this sort of how God would operate? I mean, God doesn't necessarily, I think, seem happy with all this. When the rest of Jacob's sons came on the scene of the slaughter, they looted the entire city in retaliation for Dinah's rape. flocks, herd, donkeys, belonging to everything, whether in the city or in the fields. I think the other sad part is what I put in bold. And then they took all the wives and children captive, ransacked their homes for anything valuable. I mean, essentially, they're bringing him into their clan. Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You've made my name repulsive to the people here, these Canaanites and Perizzites. If they decided to gang up on us and attack us, few as we are, we wouldn't stand a chance. They'd wipe me and my people right out. So essentially, we need to get out of town." And that pulls them back into Canaan itself. And that gets us to chapter 35, the tail end. The Levites, it's an interesting thing that the Levites are doing this. Because remember, what do the Levites, the Levite family, end up being? They become the priestly family, don't they? The ancestors of Levi also play an important role in the golden calf situation, because they're the ones that take the sword out and kill people there too. Sort of, I mean, the power of the priest. But they end up becoming the priests in the temple. Chapter 35. God spoke to Jacob, "Go back to Bethel. Stay there and build an altar to God who revealed himself to you when you were running for your life from your brother Esau." Jacob told his family and all those who lived with them. And I find this fascinating because we're back to the gods again. "Throw out all the alien gods which you have. Take a good bath. Put on clean clothes. We're going to Bethel. Clean yourself up. Let's get rid of these gods." Were they worshiping them? I mean, had they still become part of their life? "I'm going to build an altar there to God who answered me when I was in trouble and has stuck with me everywhere I've gone since." Verse 4 and 5, they turned over to Jacob all the alien gods they had been holding on to, along with their lucky charm earrings. Jacob buried them under the oak tree in Shechem. I wonder if they're still there today. No one has found them. Then they set out a paralyzing fear descended on all the surrounding villages. I mean, the villages, the surrounds are afraid of this group of folks now. I mean, the mass killing, I think, would have gotten attention. But this isn't a huge group. And it's clear, I think, to a lot of people in the surroundings that whoever is with Jacob and his family has to be really powerful to be able to get rid of, to do this stuff. Verse 4 and 5. They turned over to, they buried him. Okay, verse 6 and 7. Jacob and his company arrived in Luz, that is Bethel, and in the land of Canaan. He built an altar there. He named it El Bethel, which is the God of Bethel, because that's where God revealed himself to him when he was running from his brother. Verse 8, I find this weird in verse 8. How did Rebekah's nurse get into this group? Because that's what we got in verse 8. Rebekah's nurse. Is Rebekah dead? And the nurse tags along with Jacob? I don't know, but whatever the case is, Rebekah's nurse, Deborah, so we got a name, died, and she was buried below Bethel under an oak tree. God revealed himself once again to Jacob after he had come back from Paddan Aram and blessed him. Your name is Jacob, but that's your name no longer. This is sort of where we have this whole, okay, now you are Israel. In this very sacred place of Bethel. And this is where there's sort of a connection here between Abraham and Jacob here in this connection with God in verse 11 and 12. God continued, I am the strong God. In Hebrew, this is El Shaddai. This is, God has a number of names in the Old Testament, but El Shaddai is Almighty God, the God of the universe. This is the name that is ascribed when Abraham has an encounter with God. This isn't always used. This is not used all that much in the Old Testament. But this is Almighty God now. I am the strong God. Have children flourish. A nation, a whole company of nations will come from you. Kings will come from your loins. The land I gave Abraham and Isaac, I now give to you and pass it to your descendants. This is the promise I made with Abraham, and I'm going to keep it. Had to be really empowering for Jacob. And then God was gone, ascended from the place where he had spoken with him. Jacob set up a stone pillar on the spot where, again, he loves setting up these pillars. This is number 3 that he set up. He pours oil. I mean, they have this moment in time. He calls it Bethel. Bethel is the house of God. Again, this will be a sacred place for the children of Israel when they finally do settle the land of Canaan. In verse 16 and 17, they left Bethel. They were still quite a ways from Ephrath and that's where they're journeying to go to Esau. Rachel went into labor, hard labor. When her labor pains were at their worst, the midwife said to her, "Don't be afraid, you have another boy." With her last breath, for she was now dying, she named him the son of Pain, or Benoi. But his father changed that name and named it Benjamin, son of good fortune. Rachel died. She is buried near Bethlehem. There's still a tomb there today. I don't know if anybody's ever gotten into it to see if there's any bones there, but that tomb is very sacred. And in fact, when the Jews built that wall between Israel and the West Bank, they made intentionally a little jog up to include her tomb because it's sacred to them. Women go there to pray partly because of fertility, if they're having children and stuff. It's very sacred today. He sets up a pillar to mark her grave. There is a pillar, actually, that is set up there. I don't know when it was ever put up, but it is still there today. Rachel's gravestone. Verse 21, Israel kept on his way, set up a camp at Migdal Eder. While Israel was living in that region, for some reason, out of the blue, Reuben went and slept with his father's concubine. I mean, the mother of a couple of his kids. I've always believed, when Moses was writing this, you could have whitewashed the story. Why did you include that, Moses? Doesn't it seem odd that so often, this is partly what helps me think this is real. And the fact that they would remember that over the centuries.
But it plays into the blessing.
Sure. And then you've got the list of the kids. In verse 27, 29, finally Jacob made it back home to his father Isaac at Mamre, present-day Hebron. When Abraham and Isaac had lived, Isaac was now 180 years old. Isaac breathed his last and died, an old man full of years. And indeed, Jacob and Esau get together again to bury Dad. And they bury him, supposedly in that cave where Abraham and Sarah are buried. And it is a question, is Rebekah alive? It doesn't seem as though she is. Do you see in this of Jacob's growth in his faith? If you had the story of Jacob swindling his brother out of the birthright, it brings, I think, Jacob down, in one's understanding or one's respect for the guy. But as you would join him coming back to the land of Canaan, it is the fact this guy has grown in his faith and understands where God is at in his life. He becomes the patriarch and really seems to witness to his family. God's been with us. Just look back. All of that is the evidence. God's with us. Why should we be afraid? I think that clearly Rachel was Jacob's love. And I sense it's one of the reasons that Joseph becomes so special to Jacob. It goes into the whole coat thing that we'll be in next week. I mean, why does he treat Joseph any differently? It's because he really loved Rachel. Isn't it odd in this chapter that there's only one verse about Rachel? Rachel dies, they bury her. Off they go. It's an interesting section, these five chapters.
Was there not any formal form of worship at that time?
No.
So their sense of God was just through personal revelation.
Yes, and it is part of the struggle of the Old Testament. Sort of, is there formal worship at this time? There doesn't seem to be. There seems to be an understanding of sacrifice. There seems to be an understanding of offerings, giving the gods something. That's fairly typical with most religions, where gods are given something. As time goes on, there becomes more formal worship. But I think what we're seeing here, particularly in Genesis, the beginnings, is the beginning of the relationship, this really personal, in-depth relationship between God and man. And he's doing it through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so you see them as they learn, as they grow to understand God. And their understanding that he is this powerful, all-consuming God. That's what they're trying to raise, I think, to their family. Get rid of the gods, the other gods, the idols. That's not who we are.
That growth that we see in them, I think that sometimes we look for that in ourselves. How have we grown?
Yeah.
We fall, we return, we repent, we sin,
Yeah.
pursue, we return.
In some respects, when you look at the story of Genesis, and particularly the Abraham to the end of Genesis, this is a story of us, isn't it? We're like this. I mean, it's easy to condemn. I mean, all this, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? The reality is we're sinners too. God's faithful. We may not be.
Can't we say that Jacob's deceitfulness started with his mother?
Well, I think Jacob sort of had it in him. I think his mother, I think his mother enabled it. And it could be that when Esau came in and wanted that soup or wanted that stew, is that this was just sort of a spur of the moment thing that Jacob decided, well, give me your birthright.
Makes me think she had done that before.
It could be. I have a feeling that it wasn't simply just out of the blue that she decides, well, let's get the final blessing. No, we know that Jacob and Rebekah were close. And I think it sort of goes back to this revelation that Rebekah had received from God, that the older would serve the younger. And I think that played into this, because there's no indication that Rebekah ever told Isaac about this. And so for some reason, she's on Jacob's side. And what is Jacob? Is he a mama's boy, but I mean, is he a weaker kid? I mean, you had the hunter, the strong guy. Is this little puny whatever? So I'm going to protect him. I'm going to love him, and we're going to get that. I don't know.
Aren't we parents a lot of times fault for some things that you see our children do?
Well, sure. Well, Rebekah clearly doesn't come off clean in any of this. I mean, she's guilty. Well, they're sort of all guilty, but Rebekah clearly is not a good example of a mother. You don't really see any monument to Rebekah in Israel. You do see one to Rachel. Rachel is still highly regarded. I mean, as this person that you connect with when you're in labor or for having a kid.
She's Laban's sister.
Yep. Yes. Well, and Laban, just think of all the stuff that comes out of that family up north. I mean, why in the world? Apparently, the Canaanites were horrible people. I mean, clearly Abraham did not want his son marrying any of the Canaanites. So let's go up there to our family home and let's get a wife there. Well, the one that you bring down really is no gem. Well, the Canaanites were not good people. The Philistines at this point in time were sort of part of that Canaanite group. I mean, they're not good people.
Is the Canaanites, are they still around? Do they still, I mean, is there a worship of pagans still?
There's I think some that sort of carry that moniker. I don't. I mean, in some respects, that whole thing sort of died out. We know there's Samaritans around because they've traced their family roots, but I'm not sure. I'll dig into that with the Canaanites. And they were pretty pervasive because the Canaanites ran from southern Syria all the way down, to the desert in the southern part. So
God doesn't, he promises Abraham the land, he promises Isaac, he promises Jacob. They go off to Egypt. But 400 years later, then God says, now the sin of the Canaanites is so big, he's going to destroy them. But he doesn't give it to Abraham because their sin is not, I can't remember how the Bible puts it, their sin is not yet grown to the point where I'm ready to do
Yeah.
that.
yeah, it seems as though God's timeline, is a little bit different from what one would think.
There's that statement in
Yeah.
there, something about
Yeah.
the sin of the Canaanites had not yet reached.
And it sort of, I mean, the Canaanites seem to get so bad that it's sort of like the flood. God decides to use the children of Israel as part of that plan. Now you go up and you clean this out. And you get the land now. And you've got actually some roots there because of Abraham and the family.
And then when they don't completely do that and annihilate them all, that's the thorn in their side that leads to all kinds of problems.
It is. And particularly for the northern kingdom of Israel. Because it's the northern kingdom of Israel, when they had this civil war and the north and south split, it's the northern kingdom of Israel that really veers off into Canaanite worship again. They're the ones that go back into the high places. They're the ones that have all of these idols now. And the people down south are, they should be punished. Well, you guys aren't really much better either. But they fall in that 722. And I think for a lot of folks, it was this relationship that they had with the Canaanite religion, which was very seductive. I mean, when you have a religion that's really very much based sexually, why not? I mean, why wouldn't the men want to go to the temple to have sex with the prostitutes? And do it all in the name of religion. All in the name of religion. All right, well, we'll continue on with the next 5 chapters next Sunday. Let's close with a word of prayer.